Thank you for that introduction. And thank you to Emily and Hannes for the very kind invitation to present here today. I have to admit to not being a delusion and to introducing some philosophers in this discussion who might sit uncomfortably with delusions. So perhaps if the delusions in the audience would take that as an invitation to respond and tell me how delusion, framework might work with some of this, I would be grateful. I should also say that my abstract focuses on the figure of the child, and that is an earlier consideration of mine. I have developed this paper to think more about our emotions, the emotional response, the affective response that we make to such figures as childhood and parenthood in climate change fiction. So if I could, I should be changing this really to the ethics and aesthetics and emotion of posterity, because that is really what I'm focusing on today. I'll start by introducing the Anthropocene as a threshold concept to echo really the title of this conference, the symposium. Indeed, Timothy Clark describes the Anthropocene as a threshold concept. It is, for Clark, and I'm paraphrasing him, a state of being that highlights the absurdity of enforcing a line between, or it signals a state of being that highlights the absurdity of enforcing a line between the human and non-human. And the Anthropocene implores us really to consider the hubristic, the almost Lilliputian dimensions of our condition in the Anthropocene. It both erases a false threshold, therefore, and it places us on a new threshold of new ontological insight. And so, perhaps the challenge for art of the Anthropocene is to expose and explore the threshold. The realist and humanist mode of much climate change fiction would seem to be the last place to look for such an insight. This is particularly so because climate change fiction translates the future into the relatively narrow issue of posterity, and then it further frames posterity in the intimate and conservative language of parenthood. But I would like to argue today that the ethical and aesthetic dimensions of the emotional cannot be underestimated. So perhaps first I should define what I mean by climate change fiction. I mean simply, I think it's simple, fiction that engages with anthropogenic climate change in terms of plot, setting, or character. And I think the word anthropogenic is that really important word that gets left out of the phrase climate change, because that's what I mean when I talk about climate change. And that's why I think of climate change as part of the Anthropocene. Now, you may have already heard the term sci-fi. I'm somewhat uncomfortable with it, I have to admit. I think it imagines that this category is a genre, and there are problems with thinking of it as genre, right? I won't call it a genre, because the category encompasses a great many genres. Thrillers, satires, if you think of the Individual Solar, and the mode in which Margaret Atwood's Mad Adam trilogy is written. Certainly, of course, dystopias, especially science fiction dystopias. But then some of these dystopias are given to the romance mode as well as the comic mode. That's, by the way, a photo of a sci-fi display at the kind of flagship bookstore of foils on Charing Cross Road in a very hot summer of 2013 to introduce hi-fi. And in fact, the person who claims to have invented the word hi-fi, a somewhat eccentric journalist called Dan Bloom, who is based in Taiwan, and whom I'm really happy to say is not in this audience, because he tends to have a certain kind of possessive attitude to the word hi-fi, and will send you nasty tweets and emails if you use it in a way with which he doesn't agree. So he's not here, though I realise I'm recorded. You might get them after all. Okay, I think it's more helpful to think in the way Sylvia Mayer thinks, rather than call it a single genre. To differentiate between climate change novels that are set in the future and those that are set in the present. The first, says Mayer, can be characterized as a narrative of, or narratives of catastrophe, and the latter as narratives of anticipation. And Mayer reminds us that there exists an increasing number of climate change novels with these anticipatory, contemporary, or near-future settings. Okay, so they're not really, a great many of the climate change novels being published in the past few years, past 5 years, I'd say, are much more about being in the present or near future and anticipating the disaster of climate change, the crisis of climate change. And therefore, climate change emerges in these novels as a complex psychological or ethical problem, demanding just as complex solutions. And these one might characterize as realist and even sentimental in their reliance on the reader's emotional engagement. I'll return to this issue of emotional engagement later. For now, we want to note that what is so important about the name and phenomenon of climate change fiction is that it is part of the question of what it means to produce literature and art more broadly, as well as to mount literary criticism and cultural criticism more broadly in the Anthropocene. Two prominent thinkers have addressed this question in their two most recent books. Timothy Morton in Hyperobjects in 2013, which we'll hear about from Robin in a bit, and Timothy Clark in Eco-Criticism on the Edge of 2015. Okay. They both are actually saying very much for something, I have to say. Interestingly, I'm sure Clark read his copy of Morton and thought, oh damn, he has just finished his book. But reading Clark is a lot like reading Morton while sober, or kind of grown up Morton. I say so. Timothy Morton's a lovely guy. But anyway. For Morton, the Anthropocene is filled with hyperobjects like global warming. Hyperobjects are objects so massively distributed in space and time that they challenge notions of subjectivity. And they mean that we are no longer able to think history as exclusively human. Now Clark, arguing along the same lines as Morton, suggests that the Anthropocene enacts the demand to think of human life at much broader scales of space and time, something which alters significantly the way that many once familiar issues appear. Clark's and Morton's propositions are the same. The Anthropocene has launched us onto a new ontological and epistemological awareness of time in geological rather than human terms. Now, it would seem that one of the Anthropocene's temporal challenges is its demand to reframe our immediate, individualistic, intimate concerns in terms of the intergenerational, and particularly of the remotely intergenerational. This temporal question elicits an ethical one. How do we interact with future generations that are remote in time? So, for Morton, the utilitarian and individualistic responses that we're so used to are inadequate in the Anthropocene. Posterity in the Anthropocene is, for Morton, a version of the prisoner's dilemma. Now, I don't have a lot of time to go into what the prisoner's dilemma is, and I'm hoping that most of you are familiar with it, with the prisoner's dilemma of game theory. It's a game that demonstrates that the pursuit of individual reward results in harsher punishment all around. Whereas if you work in coalition and cooperation, you'll get greater payoff. So it's the idea that if you put two accomplices, you are arrested and you interrogate them separately, and each of the prisoners can't communicate with the other, and they're given an option. And basically the option to the prisoner, to one prisoner, is this: if you confess, but your partner is silent, your partner gets 20 years, you go free. If you both confess and they don't know what the other one's saying, if you both confess, you get 5 years. If you both remain silent, you each get 1 year. Okay. Now, if you do it simultaneously, at the same time, nobody knows what the other one's saying, it makes sense to betray your partner, your prisoner, your fellow prisoner. But if you play the game over and over again, completely randomized number of times, it actually makes more sense to cooperate. And that, if you like, is the idea that we should really be cooperating with strangers. And Morton says that actually this idea of cooperation must reach across time. The future self is like this fellow prisoner. The future self is unimaginably distant in one sense, and yet hyper-objects like the woman have brought her into the adjoining prison cell. She is strange yet intimate. The best course of action is to act with regard to her. Now, as it turns out, intergenerational ethical concerns dominate the environmentalist imaginary in this way. The future self is not just next door, she is our child, she is our grandchild. That is to say, posterity tends to occur in Anthropocene rhetoric and narrative as parenthood. One need go no further than Al Gore's words at the end of An Inconvenient Truth. Future generations may well have occasion to ask themselves what were our parents thinking, or did they wake up when they had a chance? We have to hear that question from them now. You could also go to James Hansen's dedication in his book, Storms of My Grandchildren. He is the NASA scientist turned climate change campaigner, and he actually calls his book Storms of My Grandchildren and refers to those grandchildren as the reason for writing the book. He doesn't want them to say, why didn't Grandpa do something? Okay. And if you go to climate change novels, particularly in the realist mode that I've been talking about, you'll find that the theme of parent-child relationships dominates much of this climate change fiction. So we could think of the likable female protagonist of Flight Behavior by Barbara Kingsolver. There's the stay-at-home dad, who is one of the protagonists of 3 novels in the middle. It's a trilogy by Kim Stanley Robinson. His relationship with his son is a very important part of that novel. And one could even look at a novel like The Road, which we might think of as a climate change novel in effect. Certainly in reception, it is supposedly, according to the blurb at the back of the novel for the globally warmed generation. It may not be one of intent, but it's been marketed as such. And there, of course, the power of the novel lies in that relationship between the man and the boy. But the sentiments conjured up by such parenthood discourse would certainly be mistrusted by thinkers in the Anthropocene. Is that better? The sentiments conjured up by such parenthood discourse would certainly be mistrusted by thinkers in the Anthropocene, such as Clarke. To confine the complex interspecies and intergenerational demands of posterity to the language of parenthood is to stay on the very safe side of the threshold, as Clarke would have it. It resembles an insistence on humanizing a future that is blatantly and, for some threateningly, post-human, a future that undoes the simple equations of human and non-human binaries. But it's not just the sentiments expressed, but the very problem of sentiment, or the sentimental, that comes under fire in Clarke's post-human philosophy. Certainly, this is the main difference between Clarke's position and Morton's. Morton argues for a radical, objective, futural ethics based on what he sometimes calls care and sometimes intimacy. As, for example, when he writes, what best explains ecological awareness is a sense of intimacy, a sense of being close, even too close, to other life forms, of having them under one's own skin. Such a reliance on feelings of care and purpose actually sit quite uneasily with Morton's rejection of humanistic subject-object relations, what he calls correlationism, and care, if you like, is correlationism through the back door. Clarke admonishes Morton for this. He decries Morton's stance as what he calls an underdefined and mildly sentimental ethic of care, one that is recuperated too hastily into ethical and cultural agendas that we would have expected Morton to question. Now, the current direction being taken by the climate change novel, with its individualistic discourse of posterity as parenthood, is exactly the kind of ethical and cultural agenda of anthropocentric sentimentality that Clarke seeks to question. For Clarke, fiction's strategies of what he calls immediate identification and empathy, render the novel suspect in the Anthropocene. The reliance on human emotion is part of a false belief, says Clarke, in a kind of coherent, so-called manifest image of selfhood. Nonetheless, what I would like to venture here is a partial defense of this sentimentalized parenthood rhetoric. Just a partial one. What I'm positing is neither an outright rejection of emotion that Clarke would suggest, nor this kind of uncritically mawkish position of Morton's that we just have to care more. I'm suggesting instead that the affective, subjective, and anthropocentric demands made by the seemingly sentimental narrative of parenthood that you find in climate change fiction, among others, can have potentially productive and self-reflexive effects. One starting point is to consider the usefulness of emotion per se in a public sense. Now, the very words sentimental or sentimentality, it popped up in Hannes's presentation as a kind of handy insult for some eco-critics. The very word sentimental suggests a kind of inappropriate access of access or untimeliness of feeling in the wrong place, feeling too much. Derived, I think, from a common mistrust of feeling itself. Nonetheless, certainly Anglo-American ethical philosophy has begun to consider the moral implications of the emotions, but here's where I think, Q&A would be interested in a more continental approach and what that brings to it. But for now, I'll go to thinkers like Robert Solomon and Martha Nussbaum, who've argued that emotions involve cognitive appraisals and are thus a key component in judgment. So Solomon very usefully actually distinguishes between care, compassion, affect, emotion, and so on. And he describes sentimentality as the appeal to tender feelings, and certainly says that it's a precondition for ethical engagement. Nussbaum, in her recent book, Political Emotions, suggests that emotions might therefore be helpful in supporting political norms and principles. She asserts that it should be no more objectionable, and that's a quote up there, to ask people to feel attached to good political principles than it is to ask them to believe them. Now, in Nussbaum's account, it is art that helps us, that plays such a role. For Nussbaum, the emotions are eudaimonistic, meaning that they tend to emanate from a limited personal perspective. And it's symbols and poetry, she says, that allow the abstract principles, distant people, to move into what she calls our circle of concern. But lest we might construe all this as a simple call for propaganda, Nussbaum makes clear that the principles themselves and the emotions they prompt must be continually scrutinized and criticized. That is, art does not simply evoke emotions, it allows us to scrutinize them and allows us to scrutinize the judgments we might make because of them. Now, at first blush, this sentimentalized rhetoric of posterity as parenthood that I've been alluding to looks like a kind of eudaimonia in Nussbaum's analysis. The images of parental care that dominate climate change fiction merely construe the planet's future in terms of a very small, selfish, and human circle of concern, to use Nussbaum's phrase. But I think it's crucial to distinguish between literature's potential, not as a naive transmitter, but as a subverter of anthropocentrism. Exercising just the kind of pluralized, dissenting artistic freedom that Nussbaum describes, climate change fictions offer a particular opportunity for emotional reflection on the future. Not just in their range, in the kind of many texts that inhabit the category of sci-fi, which we call it that, but in their depth. And I'm talking about the relatively diffuse and capacious form of the novel. So, as a literary scholar, I'm actually quite committed to thinking about what it is that you go through when you read a novel and what the novel form particularly achieves. Certainly, the specific category of the novel becomes pertinent here. Unfortunately, I think Clarke draws a rather sorry picture of literature when he kind of depicts literature as, if you like, stumbling at the threshold of the Anthropocene. He laments that linguistic narrative in particular fits least well the demands of the Anthropocene. It's seemingly allied with forms of anthropocentric thinking to be overcome. But I would contend that the power of the journey taken through narrative by the reader, one in which identification, empathy, and therefore a range of emotions from compassion to anger might be invoked, can't be underestimated. Now, okay, here's where I'm coming to my ending, but I want to reflect on the endings of some of these novels. More to the point, it's the way in which the journey through the novel ends that sets of concerns that we literary scholars name closure, climax, denouement, the point at which we distinguish perhaps between round and flat characters. It's the way in which the journey ends that usually matters. It's not just that happy or tragic endings shed a retrospective light on the past events of the novel, guiding us to read them positively or negatively. More than this, I'd like to suggest that an ending, or even a lack of an ending, can serve as an invitation to scrutinize or criticize, to use Nussbaum's words, the emotions and judgments that have come before in the narrative. Now, here's where, actually, it's that moment, the morning of your paper, where you think, actually, this is the bit that I really want to talk about, okay? Tragic spectatorship. I think Nussbaum's discussion of the ethical efficacy of tragic spectatorship is especially helpful, but I actually want to build on the tragic spectator and turn that into a reflective spectator. A reflective tragic spectator. But first I need to explain what I mean by tragic, what Nussbaum means by tragic spectatorship, but I don't think she does enough with reflection. The reader of the ending is akin to a tragic spectator. For Nussbaum, tragic spectatorship, quote, cultivates emotional awareness of shared human possibilities. And as she says, the central emotion aroused by tragic spectatorship is compassion. But I do want to distinguish between mere tragic spectatorship and what I would call a radical or critical tragic spectatorship. And to make that distinction, I'm going to invoke yet another idea of response, and that is anthropodenial. Okay? To make that distinction, I'm going to note Nussbaum's elaboration on tragic spectatorship as involving an awareness of human vulnerabilities, as well as human possibilities. Okay? After France the Wild, Nussbaum invokes the word anthropodenial, which is a term that refers not just to our denial of all things of the body and our desire to transcend the animality of existence, and I realize that echoes here with Emily's paper, but to our idea of ourselves as truly human. So anthropodenial is really that state where we refuse to consider the animality of who we are, but we also, in its place, think of ourselves as somehow purely and truly human, inhabiting a highly individualized and invulnerable state of transcendence, unity, and omnipotence. And the distinction I want to make is one between merely spectating, merely even tragically spectating, and feeling, or the animal vulnerability as tragic, looking back on the stories that are told and feeling a kind of compassion for that tragic animal of the novel, the human being. I want to make a distinction between that and a more critical awareness, a reflection on what that tragedy could mean. Not just emotional or tragic, but critically emotional or tragic endings enable us to interrogate shared values, virtues, and principles. And in the case of climate change fiction, I'll just throw a couple of examples up very quickly. The potential exists for radical endings to query the kind of human exceptionalism that has led to climate change. It's no coincidence, I would argue, that most of the seemingly realist or sentimental novels that come under the category of climate change actually offer radical endings. For one thing, the postmodern or metafictional challenge to narrative resolution that the radical ending mounts can serve to undermine the idea that time always or only works at a human scale, to human desires or within human control. But more importantly, many of these unconventional endings actively challenge the conventional anthropocentric accounts of parenthood that have come before in the novel. So, for example, in Maggie G's environmental dystopias, The Flood and the Ice People, I'll just describe it very briefly, the novel ends with altered biospheres. And the novels up to now have been about parental woes and trials and tribulations. And these become redundant and insignificant. Sarah Hall's The Kahalan Army, in the middle, details one woman's kind of brutalization at the hands of an ecocidal regime, a brutalization that involves forced sterilization. But all of this violation, if you like, of reproductive rights, unexpectedly turns into a broader manifesto for political change. And the much debated ending of The Road, if you've read it, is a curious lyrical description of trout in a stream, which has been much debated because it seems to say nothing about the powerful bond between father and son that dominates the novel. But I think that's probably the point, because it forces us to look elsewhere. I think perhaps the most interesting of all is Barbara Kingsolver's flight behaviour. So I'll say a little bit more about this. Precisely because this conventionally realist tale that's the novel on the right, it's a very realist tale of parenthood, which lulls one, I think, into a false sense of sentimentality, that this is all this is going to be, that we have to look after our children better, and that means we're going to look after the planet better, etc., etc. So in the novel, very briefly, it's about how climate change causes millions of monarch butterflies to descend on the hills above a farm in a poor Appalachian settlement. And it describes the impact of all of this, the kind of monarch butterfly phenomenon, on a young woman called Robia, who, if you like, has lived a life of financial and intellectual deprivation. And this monarch butterfly phenomenon brings a media circus into her backyard, brings a group of scientists into her life. And we watch this young woman and her son move from ignorance to concern for the butterflies to a kind of scientific ecological awareness of Robia. And at the end of the narrative, sorry, plot spoiler, she leaves her kind of loser, well-meaning but loser husband. She enrolls in college, starts a science degree, and encourages her young son to do the same when he grows up. So far, all is apparently sentimental sweetness and light. But the conclusion, after all this, offers us a shocking ending. A flood engulfs the farm and all the surrounding land as far as the eye can see. Robia is at home alone. She climbs the hills behind the property. She witnesses not just this devastation, which is surely death to her and to many others. A couple of last paragraph, actually, it turns out. And she watches all this with a kind of fascinated calm. Okay? But at the same time, she watches the kind of reawakening of the monarch butterflies, which means that they have survived, the last of this species, as it turns out. Okay? So, commentators, critics of the novel have been really puzzled by this. Why is she so calm about it when surely she's going to die? This calm of hers, this fascination and indeed almost bliss of hers, is not alarm and tragedy, it's not sadness, it's not melancholy, it's not lament. It prioritizes the butterfly's survival over her children's romance, her story. And it's very odd, actually, to say the least, that Timothy Clark, who's so keen to read anthropocene novels for a kind of scale-out arrangement, actually misses this conclusion. He thinks she survives. He thinks it's a real shame she survives. He thinks, what he would have liked, he says, is a kind of pointed distinction between her story and the fate of the butterflies. And I think this disjunction is exactly what happens. But it's so interesting that this overwhelmingly conservative set of readerly and parental emotions evoked up to then in the novel leads Clark to think that that's the way he's going, when actually what the novel is doing is getting us to feel a certain way and then shocking us out of it in order to evoke an unconventional and in fact radical kind of posterity. The emotion that leads us up to that, however, is vital for the shock that follows. And here's where I am wrapping up. The realist mode of climate change fiction, with its commitment to conservative versions of care and compassion, is seemingly unlikely terrain on which to mount an anthropocene challenge to our understandings of time. Nonetheless, the sentimental journeys initiated by some climate change novels can lead to unexpectedly radical forms of posterity and the future. Closing the final pages of such a novel, the reader is invited to turn not just tragic, but reflective spectator, able to scrutinize the emotions and judgments that characterize the human condition, and to consider their effectiveness at the threshold of the Anthropocene.